You are listening to Faithless Brewing, a Magic the Gathering podcast for the Spike Rogue. Each week we design new decks for tournament play. We put our creations to the test and share our findings on the air. Coming up on the Roundup, is Pioneer on the brink of a Hogaak summer? What's new and modern on the eve of Lord of the Rings? Zach Manacymbal Ryle returns from the high seas to help us dissect the latest technology from around the multiverse. That's all coming up on Faithless Brewing. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Faithless Brewing Podcast. I'm David Robertson, joined, as always, by the CEO of the Faithless Brewing Podcast. He is KDan Online, Daniel Shaver. What is going on?
Hey, I'm doing well, David. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. And we have a very special guest making an emotional return after months at sea. Is the man himself.
The man, the symbol, the Manacymbal.
The man, the symbol. Manacymbal Online. What is going on? How are things? How have you been?
Hey, Dan. Hey, David. I'm so excited to be back. I've been great. I just had the most, musically and artistically satisfying, probably cruise contract of my life, which is fun. I have been invited to go record drums on the album of the guy who was playing guitar in that band. So I'm going to be in Nebraska for 3 weeks this vacation. So that's in a little while.
Oh dear.
And then my next contract is going to be even better than this one, I hope. So everything's going great. And in the professional world, I just talked about it on my stream today for the first time, but I've been putting in a lot of work to within the next year or so make a transition from working as a drummer to working as a piano bar entertainer. So if anyone has any more questions about that, you can get at me on Twitter, or I'm sure I'll talk about more about it on my stream. But there should be more Magic the Gathering parody songs coming from me in the next little while. And then in the next couple of years, hopefully I'm going to be able to do that for a living, which should be better money, and I get to run my own show.
Wow, there was a lot packed into that minute of updates from you right there, Zach. That's well, congratulations. Very happy for you.
Yeah. I understand that I was jumping around a little bit. Yeah.
I'm just picturing that Simpsons parody song you did of the Music Man scene with the mono red, and so
right.
That's basically going to be you, right? You're going to be rolling up with your whipping out magic cards.
Yeah, that's what you do. You hang out in the piano bar and you play a lot of sing-along songs. After 9, after 11, you get to play a lot of dirty songs. Whole bunch of classic stuff, and then you can inject your own flavor into your performance. Get to have a lot of back and forth with the guests in there, so should be fun.
So yeah, for people that don't know, Zach currently is playing drums on cruise ships. So that's what he's referring to when he's coming back. And just so people know where to find him, if they want to ask for more information, youtube.com/Manacymbal, symbol SYMBAL, and at Manacymbal.
CYMBAL.
Oh, did I say it wrong? Symbol like the instrument,
right.
Like a drummer would play. Yeah.
Symbol like the instrument. That's the one.
Yeah. Twitter at Manacymbal as well. So those are the two places you can find Zach.
Twitch.tv or twitch.com if you prefer /Manacymbal. Yep. He was streaming the day after he got back, and you're going to get him, a good 5 weeks of streams before you have to go record in Nebraska. Is that right?
Yeah. So 5 weeks of streams, then I'm off to Nebraska for 3 weeks. I might stream a couple times from there. I don't know what the recording schedule is going to be like exactly. But obviously that's going to be the priority.
The studio.
Yeah, well, you know what? Maybe. Who knows? I mean, because when we do my tracks, like usually you lay down drums first. So I'll be hanging out in the studio, and they're going to be, recording bass, guitars, all sorts of nonsense, and maybe I'll just be hanging out playing Magic Online. Maybe I'll stream some of it. Who knows? Anything could happen.
Well, we're super excited to have you back, Zach. Glad to hear more from you. Looking forward to having you on the podcast while you're here. We got a lot of stuff to catch up on. We actually did not put out any episode last week. I was having a bit of travel chaos myself. got trapped in Mexico City while a volcano was erupting, so that was a little bit awkward, and there just was no time to put out an episode, much less record one. So we got a bunch of decks, a bunch of going-ons to talk about from the last couple weeks of play in Modern and Pioneer. So we'll dig into all of that. So we'll hear more from Zach, hear about what's been on your mind Magic-wise, and talk about some decks we liked.
Yeah, so before we get to any of that, we need to do, of course, a little housekeeping at the top here. So we'd like to give a big shout out to our two newest patrons. They are Brandon R. and Pat L. Thank you very much for the support and welcome to the Faithless Brewing family. Just a reminder, if you enjoy the podcast and would like to support us, the best way to do that is to go to patreon.com/faithlessbrewing. When you join, you get to join the Discord and you get to get all kinds of fun ideas kicked around, lots of fun chat. You get to support the show. There's other fun perks. You can vote for cards when we start a new monthly project. So lots of stuff happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Patreon is the best way to support the podcast, and just come hang out with us. We'd love to see you there. All right, Zach. So I got to ask you, have you been keeping up with the Magic scene the last few weeks or months while you've been at sea?
Yeah, a little bit here and there. Definitely usually what happens is at the beginning I fall off big time and I don't really pay attention to too much. It's just very busy and I'm trying to stay focused on what we do. And then over time it kind of creeps back into my everyday life. So listening to this podcast, listening to the Dive Down, Mark Rosewater's Drive to Work, and then just paying attention to the general happenings. So it was interesting to see the shift. I say interesting. For me, it was not an exciting proposition to see the shift that every Pro Tour format, all the RCQs would be required to be the same format. That is not something that I'm particularly excited about, but, and that's just because I don't want to play Standard. It was also because I assumed that they would never, ever do a Modern Pro Tour, but we are getting a Modern Pro Tour, so that's exciting.
Pro Tour Lord of the Rings is what they're calling it. That's about 2 months away. We are less than a week away from the official beginning of Lord of the Rings hype season. So that's all coming. Mm-hmm. It's going to be Frodo summer. Hot Hobbit summer.
Hot Hobbit summer. Hot Ring summer. Yeah. So, and other than that, just paying attention to developments in metagames and the occasional Twitter drama, nothing that where anyone's going to be talking about too much further in the future. It is a great game to enjoy as a hobby and not be so heavily invested in.
Yeah, I feel that. That's well said. I think you likened the cruise ship to just like waking up from a coma every few months and finding all these new toys to play with.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. It's very exciting, actually.
So you briefly mentioned a Standard RCQ season. I did see some confirmation online that that's going to happen at the beginning of next year. So we're currently in a Pioneer RCQ season. There is a big Pioneer tournament, the regional championships happening next weekend. At least that's the US regional championships. After that, we go back to Modern. Is that right? And then Standard coming up for the following RCQ season. There is, however, big news on the Standard front. And David, I guess you probably follow Standard closer than any of us. What are you expecting from this upcoming ban day?
To say that I follow it closer is not to say that I follow it closely. They're certainly going to ban something. The percentage of cards at the last Pro Tour was sort of ridiculously slanted to a very narrow set of cards. I think for sure Fable's going to be banned. That's the center of the discourse. What the other cards ought to be is a hilarious variety of cards that people insist are broken. So I if I was them, I would just ban Fable. But I certainly am not a Standard player. So Frank Karsten wrote a very interesting Twitter chain that sort of suggested a very modal sense, a very rigid sense of requirements for what a card must do to be banned. I thought that was really interesting criteria. That would lead to banning a bunch of cards we would not think of bannable. Of course, other people are, wanting to ban everything out of black. Meat Hook Massacre is certainly one of the worst cards to ever be banned in Standard. So it's hilarious that black already has a card that's significantly worse than multiple played cards that's banned. And they'll probably still have to ban some more cards from Red Black. So
there was a leak going around last week, a week or two ago, that has been called fake. It had like 15, 20 cards on it. Like everything from a track
I think it had 8, but
it felt like 15.
That was still nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very it looked like the Scorched Earth banning that they did in Modern that one time. When they took out Uro and 4 other cards. For Standard to have that happen, it would be insane, except for that they just had announced the expansion of the Standard format into a 3-year format, and that apparently fake article did in fact cite that as, here's the reason why we're banning all these things. So it was well written as a fake. I mean, if that is fake, if that is the case that those are not the actual list of cards that are being banned, it was well written, and kind of it read like a Wizards ban announcement. It's like, hey, we're banning these cards because they're all over the place and we don't want you to see them for 3 more years. Also, we're banning these other cards because we think that they're going to be suddenly the best deck, so we need to get ahead of that. We'll see what happens, but Fable definitely seems like the one that's going to go.
Yeah, I had no opinions about the individual cards on that fake leak because we don't really talk about Standard here at all, but it was interesting just as a kind of, it's a curiosity about what will the 3-year Standard look like. Is there going to be, a massive shift in the ban philosophy, which I guess we will find out when they put out something next week.
the problem, Dan, with the philosophy though, is that they also chose, I think, poorly to hem themselves in. So this is the only ban announcement until this other scheduled ban announcement, like months from now. So that's why I think an obviously fake leak was considered as real. Is if you actually are taking away your tools, your ability to manipulate the format, then you do have to be very heavy-handed with your bans now, because if it doesn't fix the problem, then you're just stuck with these cards, or you have to go back on your policy you just announced. So, I don't understand Wizards' mentality on this, and I do think they are going to have to change their ban philosophy. But one of the things they should change is they don't want to constantly have to be saying there's no bans, like every Monday announce there's no bans. Okay, fine, but at least revisit it like quarterly or something. I mean, it's just crazy that if they don't ban a card now, the next ban time is like November or something when they reconsider. I mean, it's some kind of
yeah.
Is that accurate? That it's not quarterly, it's like yearly? I didn't follow that so closely.
That's what I think Andrew Brown and Huey Jensen said something to that effect last week.
That just seems insane.
Like a major ban window every summer before rotation. And then apart from that, only dire emergency bans, which I guess that's their out clause. So I was wondering if that's just a signal that this is all fake.
Right.
Like,
I mean, obviously there's going to be...
They're going to ban whenever they want to, just like they always have.
Mean, it just sounds silly. And it's funny to me, the stark change in philosophy, because for those who don't remember, and it's probably 5 years ago now, but they had tried to do 18-month standard, and that was soundly rejected by the player base, apparently. And it was one of the only times I've seen so far where Wizards actually backpedaled on an implementation. So that really speaks to how unbelievably unpopular that decision must have been. This one I definitely see an ups. Like I'm definitely, it makes me more interested in standard. Generally, there was something really unsatisfying about the last set of the year only being legal for 15 months. That was really weird, right? And now proportionally, it's a little bit more balanced. The last set that gets released in a year is now going to be legal for 27 months, which is, I mean, it's very different.
It was always odd that the last set in a cycle would not be legal for as long. So you just have random cards in there that wouldn't be that popular because they weren't in standard as long. And we discover them later in modern or then Pioneer or something like that. And there's these very short-lived standard periods where certain sets came out before a real set. And so you had like a 3-month standard period where certain cards were legal. That's often when the most exploration was happening. So I think standard is a very tough nut to crack. That's why I try not to give Wizard. I like to complain about Wizards, of course, but For standard, I think it's borderline insoluble. I think one of the problems with this type of standard move is it's going to be closer to Pioneer as they continue to power creep. And if you're going to do that, you might as well just play Pioneer, unless you specifically don't like the play patterns there. We know that they've really leaned into power creep like the last 5 years, right? Like almost all of Modern is cards from the last 5 years. Pioneer, you're more and more just playing like the same standard deck plus Fatal Push and Thoughtseize. So if they're going to keep doing that, then Pioneer and Standard are going to look really similar at the end of some of these rotation periods. And then why wouldn't you just play Pioneer? But they're in a quarterly mentality. They're trying to make their money each quarter, and Hasbro is, they can only print so many different versions of, Checkers and Monopoly. So this is the only way they can make money.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the outcome of this. I pushed back a little bit that Standard is necessarily going to resemble Pioneer, because I think Standard is definitely going to be, if they keep printing cards the way they do, is going to be mostly entirely mid-range decks just mashing into each other. And at least Pioneer has the extremes of some pretty hard control decks and some pretty obscene combo/engine decks, if you want to call them that. This will definitely solve. Some standards have that issue where when it's a 5-set standard, like when we hit rotation, that first 3 months is weak because there's just no functional decks. Like everything is just waiting on cards. And then it's going to help that issue of when that last set comes out and you're on an 8-set standard, like, oh, for 3 months, we get to play the proper versions of some of these decks. So hopefully that'll be a little bit mitigated, but we'll see.
Yeah, the issue of available dual lands in Standard is something that will change, I think, in this 3-year new rotation. This came up actually there was a Q&A they ran in the Wizards Discord a couple weeks back, and Robert Taylor, shout outs to Fire Shoes, said helpfully screen grab the most important discussions that Andrew Brown and Hugh H. Jensen talked about. And then they talked a lot about mana base, because in the past they've kind of carefully doled out the available lands, tapped duels, untapped duels. That has greatly affected the speed at which you can play aggro mid-range in the different points of a standard cycle. But now, if it's you just have 3 years worth of lands at all times and Triomes are just going to be here forever, then yeah, it's going to be a mid-range soup. So what they said was their solution is going to be to print more monocolored utility lands to at least give the 1-color or 2-color decks some trade-off, some benefit from not just grabbing the best cards from every color.
On the flip side, it could make the current situation even worse if what they start doing is being like, well, now it's a 3-year standard, so every other set is going to have dual lands, but it's only going to be half the cycle, but it's actually going to be 6 out of 10, and then you're going to have to wait 6 months for the other 4 instead of 3. So I'm just saying there's ways that they can definitely screw that up.
They're not doing that. No, they did talk about they said they're not going to slow down the pace of dual lands. They're going to keep printing them at the same pace.
Good. But at the same time, it's they have to watch out for the 4-color, 5-color mid-range soup. Anyway, but this is all a lot of blue sky thinking about the issue. And generally speaking, I'm excited for it.
Yeah, it's a January problem. That's standard RCQ season.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in the next quarter.
All right, Zach, anything else that you want to add about, Lord of the Rings or March of the Machine, Aftermath, any of this stuff that has been happening while you've been on your ship?
I mean, we did have an interesting comment. It'll be in the notes here about someone really not being a fan of March of the Machine's Aftermath, and I guess the concept of mini sets. For me, it's not a big deal. It's a neat little thing that they made. I think the acquisition of cards from this set is going to be problematic because if it's not built for limited and the way they've priced it is obnoxious, the prices on these cards might just be very high, and that's frustrating. If I had any more other thoughts, it's they haven't printed enough old border reprints. And we just recently got the Brothers War, which is one of my favorite sets of all time, thanks to the retro artifact sheet, but still not enough. Come on. It wasn't even included in that, what was it, the Legends of the Multiverse sheet? Yeah, I don't think they did old frame for that, which That was a wild thing. I'm a little upset that I missed playing limited with these last couple releases because they seem insane. Lost and Zandy obviously has gotten in my head talking up how great these sets are for limited. But there are a lot of decks I want to talk about that have gone from either being kind of very fringe to being, real metagame players, or being created whole cloth from the new releases. So hopefully we can get into some of that.
Yeah, exactly. So let's shift gears then. So I think what we want to do for the rest of our time here is just highlight some of the stuff that's been going on in Modern and Pioneer, some of the cool tech, some of the discourse, if you will. And David, I want to start with you here first, because you pinged me earlier this week about this meltdown that was happening in Pioneer over the Boros Hogaak deck. What the heck is Boros Hogaak?
Yeah, so I don't know who the first person is who proposed it, so I feel bad that we're not going to give that person the right amount of credit, but they took the idea of playing the 8 of Thraben Inspector, Voldaren Epicure, so that's a creature that makes an artifact. Then on turn 2, you can cast Gleeful Demolition, turn the artifact into 3 1/1s, and if you play your second land, you can cast Venerated Loxodon or Knight Errant of Eos. So this is actually a shell. I had proposed 4 Thraben, 4 Voldaren Epicure, 4 Gleeful Demolition, 4 Venerated Loxodon to you in the chat at various times. We kind of put it aside. I'd never really followed up on it. The rule of 8, though, this Knight Errant of Eos, it turned out that this deck became kind of the next level. Now, people have played a bunch of different versions with or without Burning Tree Emissary, with or without Reckless Bushwhacker, with or without Clarion Spirit. I think most people are playing for Ornithopter. So basically, you have a deck that's an all-in aggro deck, and it's trying to do this on turn 2, or go super wide and then a Bushwhacker. So it's a Bushwhacker deck. We've had those variants exist in Modern, right? At various points, they've been almost playable before Fury and everything else. So yeah, the deck kind of burst on the scene. Again, I don't know who the first person who 5-0'd with it. A few people who stream. Of course, the Magic Online community is super parasitic. As soon as any new deck does well, all the same 10 streamers just play the exact same deck, and this is no different to the Pioneer streamers all play the exact same deck. It ended up being 2 versions of this deck played in the final of a challenge. And so obviously one of them, the winner was a red-white Convoke deck. And then people just started picking it up. And then, of course, a lot of people who play all day long just began to complain bitterly that this deck was broken and Wizards needs to do something. And then there was the anti those people that, Pioneer's always been like this. And then it was Pioneer needs better interaction. This exacerbates the play draw, et cetera, et cetera. So the entire play pattern of this deck, the discourse around the deck being broken, people just mindlessly playing whatever the deck of the week is without thinking, and then the discourse about if there should be a ban, and then the anti-discourse to that discourse has all just been purely terrible. There's just literally nothing positive, other than the first guy or gal who came up with the deck. That person is awesome. Shout outs to them. Everybody else is disgraced themselves as far as I'm concerned.
Interestingly, I ran into this deck today, and in game 1, they put, it was 12 power into play on turn 2 or something like that. And then I just demolished them in game 2 and 3, where they kind of futzed around and didn't do anything because I had a modicum of interaction, which is a fairly reasonable demand of you if you want to play the Pioneer format. You need to be able to deal with a turn 1 mana elf, right, David? So it's this is not, I don't see this sticking around as a serious problem. And we'll see with next weekend's challenges.
I see this very much actually as a mono green deck. So right. If you're trying to do your linear thing, which so many people are trying to do, I watched Aspiring Spike play a bunch of linear decks today, and you don't interact with this deck, yeah, it's going to beat you every time. It and mono green are doing a thing that's way better than any other linear format. So if you're choosing not to interact, that's fine. Then you do have to play a fast deck, and people don't want to do that, so they play a slightly less streamlined deck, and then they get really mad that these decks are better, and that's just how it's going to be. I don't know what to tell you. I'm going to shout out Sodek MTG at MTG Sodek. I don't know if he's the first person who played it. But he is the one who won the challenge, and he 5-0'd before the challenge as well. So he is among the innovators. He played a bunch of crazy cards. Like I think that Burning Tree Emissary is a crucial card. He was playing Plarg as a 2-of in some of these lists. I'm not going to pretend like I understand the lists or anything, but you can kind of throw anything in there.
I think the Plarg is mainly for the backside, which is Augusta.
Yes, but Plarg is the card. When you write it down on your sheet, you say Plarg, Dean of Chaos, instead of Burning Tree Emissary.
Augusta's pretty cute with the like tap and untap. It grants different bonuses to your creatures.
Yeah, it's a lord. It's a lord. That's also a creature.
So, and I was mentioning to Dan as a historical note, and I put a link here for the mono white Gak deck. So if you hit that, you'll see a custom goldfish search that I put together, and you'll see a streak in 2020 between 0721 and 0814. So this was a deck that was nicknamed Mono White Gak. It's the same thing that happened in Modern, of someone just threw together all these like white token creators with Intangible Virtue, Force of Virtue, and Venerated Loxodon. So, and it was very much a flash in the pan thing of people were complaining. They were like, oh my God, we need to ban something. They're putting, 10 power into play by turn 3. It's Hogaak all over again, and then disappeared off the face of the earth.
This deck looks horrible.
And the thing that like takes it all to the next level is that you have these decks that have the Convoke mechanic. And so people are like, oh, it's like Hogaak, which is even funnier, right? Right. It's like, it's not just it's like this aggro deck. We don't quite have the tools to deal with it, and when people play these all-in aggro decks, play draw matters a lot. Okay, those are all like reasonable complaints. I feel like I'm playing against Hogaak again is absolutely hilarious.
Clearly, people who never played against Hogaak. Clearly, people who never put a Leyline of the Void into play on turn 0 and then lost.
Lost effortlessly
in their main deck. In their main deck.
So just the Hogaak comparison also just took it all into the Twilight Zone. Like, oh, everyone involved just has no clue what the fuck they're talking about, and everyone just decided to be a moron. No one's trying to adapt. Now you have people just farming leagues because they're just like playing a couple of sweepers in their main deck, and then Convoke players are like, oh, this deck is unplayable right now. This sucks. It's like, yeah, I cast Anger the Gods on turn 3 and you can't win. I mean, I won't even point out some of these people. One person complained, like, I had a 2-mana removal spell and a 3-mana sweeper, and I lost the game on turn 6. This is totally broken. They're complaining about a turn 6 loss. I lost a Magic game on turn 6. And I spent a total of 5 mana at some point in the middle of the game. It's like, what are you talking about? You've never lost on turn 6 before? With a 2-mana removal spell and a Anger of the Gods in your hand? It's just ridiculous the complaints people are making.
Turning to the lighter side of things and the more fun side of things that I haven't got to play yet, but man, am I excited. Apparently, now Dan bears some resemblance to the One Punch Frog, I believe. If anyone's an anime fan. No, I'm kidding. He does look a little bit like One Punch Man.
No, I do. That's that's my Faithless Brewing token card. I'm the Monastery Mentor. I have the same haircut as those monks.
Yeah, you do have a monkish aura about you, and you spend a surprising amount of time in monasteries, considering that it's 2023.
I do. That's right. Yeah. I wrote my PhD thesis all about monasteries, so it's a very personal thing.
There you go.
And I'm glad to see that One Punch Man still relevant.
So, did your original version have Cragganwick Cremator in it? I don't know if that's the case, but either way, Goryo's Through the Breach featuring Yargle and Multani, Cragganwick Cremator, Emrakul, and what is very similar to what I remember as the grilled cheese deck. It was the guy named MTG Grilled Cheese, I think, who put together this red-black Goryo's Through the Breach deck that had Asmo and the food package sort of as its plan B, and really was super fun, really, really exciting. Never rose to particularly high heights, but now with the addition of Yargle and Multani and Cragganwick Cremator, is putting up very top challenge results in 2 different versions.
Yeah, so the reason I put this on the outline was because, like, we like to plan our seasons based on how relevant a card will be or how excited we are for it. And David, you and I were both very excited about the Chrome Host Seed Shark, perhaps unjustifiably so, I'm not sure, but we wanted that to be our first card.
Well, you did call that it wasn't going to be good.
I mean, I would say we've determined it's not good. Conclusively.
Yeah, but you also said we both like it. It can't be good.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't seen that many people playing it, to be honest, and it's like the number one card in Limited, even better than Sunfall by some metrics.
Oh my God, the Limited, the number one card in Limited.
Exactly. I got more of those coming up this week.
We shouldn't even brew. We should just
Dan's
wait. We should
favorite
let a set come out, wait 6 weeks, only brew, like number one card Limited, brew on that, number two card, that's week 2. Like we're just on a 6-week delay. What is Ben Stark drafting
Invasion
first?
of Amonkhet. You all laughed at Invasion of Amonkhet. Another overperformer in Limited that's doing very well in Constructed. Just saying. Just saying.
Is it?
Yes,
Question mark?
It is. It really is. Anyway, I'm off track.
Right, but let's bring it back. Let's bring it back to dealing 18 damage to your opponent.
My point was, as I was thinking about, Chrome Host Sea Shark, I couldn't get this damn frog off the brain, and I ended up like just drawing up a bunch of lists. I was working off the grilled cheese template, so it was a known template, so I'm not surprised that the lists that I proposed were basically this list. I just stared at the existing Emrakul Asmo Kitchen deck and just tried to trim or cut things until I could fit in exactly for Yargle and Multani's and exactly for Cragganwick Cremators. And we had a couple of versions of that. We had a red-green version, we had a black-red version, which turns out to be the most successful one. I did not get to test it at all, but other people have picked it up. Again, because like Zach is saying, this is like a somewhat known shell, and it's actually pretty good.
Yeah, it's exciting to see that it's succeeding in 2 different versions. So the one that you've highlighted here is the Goryo's Through the Breach is what it's listed as. It's got Asmo and Voldaren Epicure, a couple copies of Oval Chase Daredevil, and then a little bit surprisingly, the full 4 Profane Tutors. It would be surprising if it just didn't make sense that you have multiple AB combos. And then the kind of secret sauce of this deck is that Underworld Cookbook and Asmo together allow you to set up very carefully, I say carefully, for Cragganwick Cremator to dome your opponent. And the interesting thing about this is this deck then plays in such a way that it doesn't actually need its graveyard to set up its combo that deals 15 or 18 damage to your opponent. So Cragganwick Cremator, for those who don't remember this card, is 2 red for a 5/4 giant shaman. When it enters the battlefield, discard a card at random. If you discard a creature card this way, it deals damage equal to that card's power to target player. So basically what you do is you play that, and then you have used Underworld Cookbook to make sure your hand is either exactly Yargle and Multani, exactly Emrakul, or maybe both. So whatever number of cards you have in your hand, that they're all big guys that are going to smack them in the face for 15, which is usually good enough, and 18, which is almost definitely good enough.
Yeah, there's a surprising number of A plus B configurations that get the job done. So if Cookbook comes down on turn 1, you could die to Goryo's Vengeance as soon as the next turn. If Saga comes down on turn 1, that means Cookbook is coming on turn 3, and again, that could be the same turn or one turn before Profane Tutor comes off suspend. So something's going to happen. You're probably getting comboed. But even if you're not getting comboed, you still have to deal with the Asmo, you still have to deal with the Construct tokens. There's still Oval Chase Daredevils here, which may seem counterintuitive because that kind of clutters up your hand to prevent you from successfully using the Cremator's random discard, but Cookbook actually just solves all your problems. Just you don't have to return the Daredevil if you don't want to. I believe that's true.
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't have to.
Yeah, so if you're gonna do the Cremator,
that's
thing,
why it's an annoying thing that you have to keep clicking yes.
Click yes
it's
or
changing
no.
zones. Yeah, and you've got 4 Thoughtseize that helps you punch through, whatever interaction that people may have. And then it's still a Goryo's Vengeance deck. So
the one card that I was wondering if I should have included was Shadow Spear. Commonly seen in Saga decks, but the specific interaction I was interested in is what if I have to Goryo's on Yargle and they have a blocker, right? Like Shadow Spear would actually help a ton in that situation. It becomes a 4-mana play, but you're attacking with a 19 power trample lifelink creature at that point. But they're not playing it, so maybe it's just not necessary.
I think the assumption is that if you have enough mana to make that 4-mana play, that you probably have an Asmo and 2 food to ping down whatever's going to get in the way. I would also assume that going for a Yargle and Multani punch to the face is something you want to do either on turn 2 or if they again, if you have a way to clear the blockers, because this deck is able to be fairly grindy.
Yeah, I think Lawson had recommended Manifold Key as an option for this.
Unblockable. Yep, make it unblockable. Legit unblockable.
Or untap your cookbook for an extra token. But anyway, just cool to see.
Yeah. Also, if you Goryo's Vengeance on their end step, it can be you can pay in installments. So you can Goryo's Vengeance on their end step and then either equip or activate a key on your turn. So you could pay 2, then 3, or what have you.
But those are certified bad ideas.
It's a pretty tight list. I mean, I would not play any of these cards.
No.
Fair enough.
I mean,
fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also a distinctly different version that I included a link for. Hold on. So this is the one without Cragganwick Cremator. Just, I think it bears mentioning because it's had a few league finishes. And this is playing a copy of Atraxa, some copies of Grizzlebrand, and doesn't have any Cragganwick Cremators, no Yargle and Multanis. Is just a Goryo's Vengeance shell that's featuring Atraxa, which has probably been around in the last couple of months, but it's still performing okay and has a lot of the same features as this deck.
There's also a Jund aggro that has Cragganwicks and Yargles and does not have any Goryos. It's more like a Jund Traverse aggro. And I got a couple 5-0s, one from Bench Summer, it's a great brewer, one from nikkuniku. So, Yargle and Multani, they laughed at us when we did that as our second card of the season, but there it is.
It's a vanilla legend.
Exactly.
Also, 4-mana 5/4, nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, I was actually looking at that card and going, how is this so reasonably sized?
Cheaper fire elemental? I mean, how's that legal? Power creep.
The card is from 2006. I expected it to be a 2/3. Like,
anyone remember Balduvian Hordes? Was that 5?
Oh,
5
man,
before?
of course.
It's nice to play one creature that wasn't printed in Modern Horizons. So, it's like, or post Modern Horizons. Cragganwick Cremator is the card.
Yep.
All right. So from there, we go to some miscellaneous decks. What have you guys been liking lately? What have you been seeing?
Well, my first stream back, I was playing some mono black coffers. I heard Lawson and Moore discussing how this deck has been doing. I looked online, and indeed, it's been doing very, very well. When I left for this contract, it was about 5 months ago. This deck was very fringe. There was only a very small number of people who were playing it, and it wasn't doing particularly well, but it's really, I don't know if it's just the metagame of Modern jogging around or if there have been major developments in it, but it's much more successful. It's fun and powerful to play if you like Karn the Great Creator and big mana, and being able to interact more than most of the Tron variants do. Check that out because it's a lot of fun.
So a list that I want to highlight is a Modern list featuring Pia Nalaar, Council of Revival. This is a new rare from March of the Machine Aftermath. And David, it's one that you and I have been kind of, it's been nagging at us back of our heads because it just looks so sweet, right? So it's red, white, legendary human artificer, 2/3. Thopters you control have haste. Whenever you play a land from exile or cast a spell from exile, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So we talked about this, David, and I think, we're intrigued by the idea of 8 copies of Reckless Impulse with the new one, or 12 if you want to play Light Up the Stage. Maybe there's something there. Well, it turns out that friend of the show, DakFaden07, a great YouTuber and sometime streamer, he's been cranking out some sweet, sweet stuff. He's got 7 trophies already this season with just absolute sick brews, and they're all on his YouTube channel. I highly recommend checking that out. He decided to take Pia Nalaar and go straight into Modern, just bypass Pioneer, go straight into Modern, and he rattled off a 5/0 with what is mainly a mono-red Prowess deck, but playing 3 copies of Pia Nalaar. So mono-red Prowess, we're talking about Swiftspear, Soulscar Mage, Dragon's Rage Channeler, Lava Dart, Lightning Bolt. Good cards, but they don't actually work with Pia. So the cards that work with Pia are your 4 light up the stage, your 4 reckless impulse, and then he's playing 3 copies of Abbot of Carroll Keep, which technically exiles a card. You can then play it from exile and get a Thopter if you want. So it's actually a fairly small Pia package, but it got the job done, and perhaps a testament to the power, the ceiling of this card when it's doing its thing.
Yeah, I think you don't need that much. If you just played a 2-mana 2/3 that made 2 Thopters, that would be a broken card, and that's all. I think that's all you need to get out of this. A 2-mana 2/3 that gives you a 1/1 Thopter is actually maybe close.
Yeah, haste Thopters.
It's got a better base stat line than Third Path Iconoclast, and the fact that the Thopters have haste in your aggro burn deck kind of really feels like it seals the deal for me. In that these kind of like bursty Prowess decks are always going to find wins. People are always playing dirtly decks that can't survive this. Or, Hammer Time. There's no way Hammer Time is going to beat this level of Lava Dart, Lightning Bolt, density with Underworld Breach. So it's good to see.
And mutagenic growth with flyers is really good to finish the game.
Yep.
Is there any other card besides Pia that rewards you for playing from exile? Besides See the Truth. Don't say See the Truth. Say anything else.
Not that I know of.
I want to say for sure there's an entire commander deck that's based on that, probably with 1 or 2 commander only legends.
Yeah, there's that like owl card. It's like 1 a white and a blue for a 2/2 flying. If you play something from exile, you draw a card.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes. That was from Kaldheim, right?
But not much. I mean, but it is a more frequent thing that they're doing. Playing things from exile in red, obviously, over the last 5 or 6 years has become much more prolific. So maybe there will be more payoffs to come if Pia sees more results.
Yeah, it was unfortunate. Like, I was actually putting together a deck, but with red-white Convoke being everywhere, and then everyone being ready to fight red-white Convoke and Pioneer, this is a bad time to try out your Pia Nalaar brew. People are ready for a bunch of 1/1 tokens.
Anger of the Gods go mess you up good.
Yeah, exactly. Or illness in the ranks, or et cetera, et cetera.
Don't be afraid to register Anger of the Gods over Brotherhood's End. It is, the exile clause is very useful a large number of the time. Just don't forget that. If I have any Pioneer advice for anyone.
All right, well, from Pia Nalaar, I do want to ask you, Zach, about Chandra Hope's Beacon. This is from March of the Machine main set. It's one of those planeswalkers that just has so much text that it's got to be good. On the other hand, it costs 6 mana. I saw you streaming this today. Tell me about the deck you were playing, and what did you make of the card?
Yeah, so I actually played 2 decks basically in the last 24 hours with this card. So first of all, the card itself, Chandra Hope's Beacon. So it's 6 mana, and the name on the normal printing is difficult to read because there's so much fire. Just 4 red for a 5 loyalty legendary planeswalker Chandra with a obscenely powerful static text, which is whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. This ability triggers only once each turn. It's got a +2 loyalty, add 2 mana in any combination of colors, +1 loyalty, exile the top 5 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may cast an instant or sorcery from among these exiled cards. And finally, -X, Chandra Hope's Beacon deals X damage to each of 2 targets. This is an unbelievably powerful 6 mana planeswalker. So both the decks I played were in the Pioneer format. Pioneer is the place where I've played the largest number of 6 mana planeswalkers, whether they be 6 mana Elspeth, I think 6 mana Sorin. It's a format that I feel lends itself to, you can actually pull this stuff off without things going ludicrously well in your favor. And the deck that caught my eye, I had a link here for, which was linked to us, of course, by Fire Shoes, was a European RCQ winner who was basically playing a turns deck with Chandra Hope's Beacon and full 4 copies of Alrund's Epiphany. If anyone remembers that notorious card from Standard. And of course, the synergy there is if you cast that with Chandra in play, you get to take 2 extra turns, you get 4 birds. Basically, that combination of cards is going to kill them on the spot. That was the first league I played, and it is a 2/3, and the deck felt mostly kind of okay, but it was very clunky, and not one time did I actually ever get to like cast Chandra into another large spell. I was either winning games with her on her own, very rarely, or it was just the all runs epiphanies and other sort of chip shots that were taking people down. At that point, I talked to you folks about it, and David actually linked me to TSPJendrek's version of a similar deck. It has no taking turn spells in it, but that's fine, because it is just generally much better set up to compete in the Pioneer metagame. And what really swayed me very quickly was the 2 copies of Light Up the Stage. This is a card we highlighted during the Midnight Hunt preview season. X in a red. Deals X damage to any target. If that target is a creature or planeswalker, you get to add +1. So for a single red mana, it can kill a mana elf. But it is, a fireball or a blaze, if you want to call it that. But it is a very unique flashback of 3 in a red. You remove loyalty counters from a planeswalker you control. So when you play Chandra, Hope's Beacon, and then you light up the night. Sorry, light up the night. Light Up the Night is the name of the card. Light Up the Night with her in play. You will get to copy your Light Up the Night. Today, I took someone down with a 20 damage burn to the face. 2 copies of 10 for Light Up the Night. But you can also remove her down to 1 loyalty if you want to get that copied. Actually, hold on. My judge sense is tingling. I think you can remove all the loyalty counters from Chandra paying this. And you will still get the trigger to copy it. Don't quote me on that. Judge Rob can correct me, but I'm fairly certain you'll still get the trigger because we won't check state-based actions until after you've put the spell in the stack, at which point Chandra will have already triggered.
That sounds right. But
yeah,
are you saying this was a main part of the plan, or this was just a cute thing that came up some of the time?
I mean, if you look at the deck, there's not a lot of other ways to win. Resolving the Chandra is usually step 1. You have Shark Typhoons and you have Hall of Storm Giants. But other than that, realistically, this deck is kind of mid-range or controlling blue-red deck, which wants to resolve that Planeswalker and win the game. One of the other ways that I won a lot of games is when you resolve that Chandra, you immediately cast either Dig Through Time or you cast your Foretold Behold the Multiverse. At which point you get to draw 4 cards with an unbelievable amount of selection, and your opponent concedes on the spot because they can't possibly beat that. That happened several times.
Yeah, I mean, that's the dream for this Chandra. As you play her, you immediately do something insane with the +2 to add mana and doubling it. But the most broken things you can do are drawing cards. So that means you're spending your entire turn, 6 mana plus something else to just to draw cards. So that does require being stable, right? Like you have to have gotten to the stage of the game.
Yeah. But that's why pretty much everything else in this deck is interaction. And actually, I feel like I did a disservice to this deck because there is another win condition, which I'm sure is just due to my lack of experience with it. It's a really complicated card to play with is Divide by 0, which I'm sure David has some thoughts on. If we can borrow him for a second, because this was perplexing to me to actually get engaged with the play patterns of this card.
Yeah, I think Divide by 0 is a card that's been adopted by a lot of like blue-red and even some blue-black control. At times there's been Sultai control lists where they just, whenever you have an excess of mana, Divide by 0 is an interesting way to turn a poor interactive spell early in the game into also a win condition, right? So it's 3/4 of an interactive spell. You staple on the ability to go find your mascot exhibition. Copying mascot exhibition is really difficult for just a normal mid-range deck to interact with, right? They'll fatal push a couple of the bigger creatures. You're left with a couple 2/1 flyers and a 3/2 or whatever. And then Divide by 0 also like buys you a turn against combo, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's been a card that people want to exploit. Chandra gives you a bunch of mana, and Divide by 0 gives you something to do with it. We've thought of Divide by 0 with the 4-mana artifact that gets oil counters that reduces the cost of spells. The Sultai list, which is really the only list that's ever been successful with Divide by 0 and Pioneer, was using it with 5-mana Nissa that was letting you tap all your forest for extra mana. So Chandra sort of like a Nissa, sort of like 5-mana Teferi, where the turn you played it gives you 2 mana back. So it kind of cheats on the cost, and in theory lets you, play Chandra plus her, cast 2 fiery impulses like Dan says, stabilize the board, And then in theory, that next turn you get to untap and do some, hopefully, broken things.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that she copies a spell on your turn and your opponent's turn makes it once you untap with the card, I don't know that I've ever lost a game. It's very kind of Hullbreaker Horror-esque. It is expensive.
It can be countered, unlike Hullbreaker Horror.
It can be countered, doesn't have flash. But it is more powerful because it finds its own fuel with the +1. Looking at the top 5 cards is an obscene number. Like, that's ridiculous. And not only that, you would think, well, you have to play it by the end of your turn. No, until the end of your next turn. You can play counter spells off of this. It's ridiculous.
Oh, I did not realize that. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's really good. Or draw spells, or whatever it is that you need to do. So turning Fiery Impulse into, 2 3 damage bursts, being able to just double Anger of the Gods sometimes it just kills everything. I killed 2 Torrential Gearhulks today with that. So feels good. The league ended up being a 2-3, but again, I am, not super experienced in the Pioneer format. Another thing that's worth highlighting in the difference of these 2 decks was this one was playing 3 copies of Field of Ruin. The other one was playing none. And that is a card that you really need to, if you're going to play this kind of slow controlling deck, very important.
So the verdict so far is impressive card when you have it, fun deck, not yet above the 50% win rate though.
I mean, not in my hands. Obviously, there are other people who are doing well with it. It's one of those, like, time will tell if this is one of the better versions of these blue-red piles or if something else better comes together. But certainly very enjoyable.
And, if you're playing blue-red, mid-range blue-red control, there's just so many options. You can play creativity, and there's, 3 different versions of that. You can just play blue-red control with, Torrential Gearhulk on top. No creativity. So this has a lot of work, I think, to do. Not that Chandra isn't a powerful card, of course it is. Is it more powerful than these other options? And it's not clear, right? This deck was sort of only found, like Zach said, somewhat recently. We haven't really seen it play out. What matchups is it good against that, the Transmogrify variants are worse against, etc.
And again, just to retread on to, I think one of the disparities between Modern and Pioneer that a lot of people feel when they get into Pioneer is it is so important to build and sequence your interaction in a way where Modern, it's just, everything does everything. Everything does everything. You have Counterspell, it counters everything. You have Prismatic Ending or Leyline Binding, they exile everything. A Lightning Bolt, you point at face, you point it at creatures, whatever you want. And the gameplay in this format is very different in that you have, this deck is playing Abrades and Negates in the main deck. And there will be some matchups where those cards are of very limited use and you need to be careful to line them up. Which was what I was talking about with the lack of experience sometimes. Like, I could really feel like, oh, red-black resolved Reckoner Bankbuster, and they just got a lot out of that I wasn't able to deal with. And it was either because I didn't have the right piece of interaction for it, or because maybe I'd fired off unwisely at the wrong target earlier. So a lot to learn if you're paying attention.
Well said. All right, David, what about you? You've highlighted an interesting deck here from Pioneer that I don't quite understand.
Yeah, so this is sort of like an Elves deck. It has 4 Collected Company. It has 11 1-mana Elves, because we're counting Jasper Sentinel. I guess 12 if you want to count Deathrite Shaman. So it sort of plays like an Elf deck. You have 4 Leaf Crown Visionary. That card's awesome. 4 Elvish War Master. That card's pretty good. Only 2 Shaman of the pack. And then you have this Court of Calling package where you can summon a wide variety of possibly useful cards. A Haywire Might, a Deathrite Shaman, a Mass Vandal, a Scavenger Ooze, a Circle of Dreams Druid, a Pelucranos Reborn, a Toski, Bearer of Secrets. We haven't seen Toski in a while. So yeah, just really interesting design. I think the Black-Green Elves deck is pretty mediocre. We see one in the 5-0 deck dump all the time. This is an interesting idea. Your entire sideboard is black cards. And most of them aren't even creatures that you can tutor. There's like a one of Revoker, one of Shieldred. Everything else is interaction for less fair decks. I just like the angle that this deck is taking. You're not all in on just having a bunch of elves in play with Shaman. With the number of sweepers people are playing, maybe this is just a bad time to play elves. But I love the Court of Calling package and then just building in, pseudo answers into your main deck.
Yeah, I just assumed that Shaman of the Pack was the most important creature, but they've gone from 4 copies to 2, so clearly that's not the case.
Well, the problem with Shaman of the Pack is it's bad on turn 2. So you have this 3-drop you never want a 1/3 skip to. So it creates a weird tension. You only want it when your board is big. It's terrible after a sweeper, which is a strange thing for your more expensive card to be. Like, oh, they tapped out to sweep me. Now I get to resolve my 3-mana cards. Like, okay, a 3/2 that does a damage to your opponent is wildly unplayable. So I actually kind of like it as more of like a tutor target. Actually, we should shout out the player here. This is Rage_HS with the 5-0.
Yeah, it's a bigger toolbox package than I would have expected also in the main deck. Some of these are elves, but some are not. It's like, why is there one Pelucanos in here? Does that have some sort of silver bullet capacity that I'm not seeing?
Yeah, I think it's a reach card against spirits. It can become a lifelink creature if you just have a ton of mana. And you need to win a race. And it's resistant to removal once it flips, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't seen this thing flipped yet, but that's a yikes.
All right, well, congrats to Rage HS on the 5-0. And yeah, I mean, I guess you have to go back to the drawing board because we know that the regular Elves deck is not knocking anyone's socks off.
Yeah, I think you just have to be on the play like 4 or 5 games in a league and then just like play favorable matchups and draw well. I mean, it is a deck that has powerful draws, but it is not consistently powerful.
It's generally seems like a clearly weaker version of mono green, and I say that because it's virtually the same colors, virtually the same couple turns, and it just has different payoffs in Court of Calling and Collected Company. Court of Calling, by the way, did not realize this was Pioneer legal because I don't remember it making a lot of splashes before now. We're Collected Company. This has been a Collected Company format for much of its existence.
Yeah, Court is just not that efficient if you don't have some of the cheaty enablers that Modern has. So
yeah.
And if your bullets are not that important, it's just not that good of a card. Like, you'd just rather have Tyvar or whatever else you want in that slot. So there's one last deck I want to mention. This deck is not good as far as I can tell, but it's playing a new card from Merchant Machine Aftermath. Samut, Vizier of Noctamun. Desparked Samut, 1 green-red, 2/3, legendary human warrior cleric. First strike, vigilance, haste. Oh boy, that's a lot of stuff. Okay, so 3-drop with first strike, vigilance, and haste, and
you should see the original.
Yeah, exactly. She's lost a step or two here. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, if that creature enters the battlefield this turn, draw a card. Okay, so it's kind of a haste lord, right? Creatures that enter the battlefield this turn get to draw cards if they damage. However, the player DookieTrouserMD on Magic Online ended up going a slightly different direction. Yeah, they worked hard enough to get this deck published. We should at least acknowledge their username. They played a Gruul aggro deck that, it had some haste creatures. Like, there's a Legion Loyalist here, there's Monastery Mentor, there's Reckless Bushwhacker, and there's, of course, Samut herself. But it was also using some sneaky ways to trigger Samut. Specifically, it was using Kari Zev, Skyship Raider, who creates a reg event token, and Kumano Faces Kakazan, which will come off its 3rd Chapter 3 on the same turn you play Samut. So both of those, Kari Zev and Kumano Faces Kakazan, are capable of drawing a card off Samut the turn she comes down. Potentially, Samut herself will also deal damage, so you could be drawing 2 cards that turn, which I thought was very cute.
Yeah, I love this design. Like, they found a bunch of cards that, because I was always like, well, a 2/3 that draws a card when it hits them with haste is pretty mediocre. I still actually think Samut is just not a good card, but this is just an incredible job of like maximizing what this card does and asks you to do. Drawing cards in your deck full of a bunch of 1-mana 2/2s with no abilities is not that powerful because you're just going to draw a bunch more Legion Loyalists and Kari Zevs and Felden Ronim excavators. But this deck design is A+, like absolutely top-notch job by this person.
And when you team up a wide hasty board with a Tarka's command, people just die. Like that's always been true, right? Like if they stumble, they're going down.
Well, that's the hope, at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they got their 9th place finish in a Pioneer preliminary, so
2-1 for a good for 9th.
It's not last
in a Pioneer preliminary.
Hey, they went 2-1. I don't know what that means that they went 2-1 because I'm pretty sure preliminaries are supposed to be 4 rounds, but you know.
You know, you mentioned the previous Samut, and that made me think of 5-mana Samut, which has all these keywords, including double strike and haste. And it reminded me, David, of the Urborg Scavengers deck that you'd proposed a couple weeks ago, where we're looking for cards that grant Scavengers haste, right? That's probably the most important keyword to make the Scavenger like do the real Soul Flayer thing. And I think we had Adult Gold Dragon and Questing Beast in there, but I saw Dak Fade 07 trying this out in Modern, and he was playing Samut instead, the 5-mana Samut, I think instead of Questing Beast. And I was wondering if that was like maybe like a more useful creature overall for the Urborg Scavenger package.
Yeah, I guess if you get to draw it up where you are casting your Scavengers, it's not dying and it's getting to target a creature, yeah, you'd rather have double strike and haste. The Questing Beast is actually a card you can play because that deck was all Sultai. And so if you just want to say, okay, if we don't get to do the thing with our 8 creatures, then we're just going to lose, then you should do Samut is better than Questing Beast. But in theory, that deck could just play its 4th land and cast Questing Beast, which is actually okay against a handful of decks. So that was my thought process. But yeah, I think Samut, or maybe you want to do like 2 and 2 or something like that. But the thought was, especially in post-board games, your graveyard's going to really be under assault, right? So being able to cast your 4-mana 4/4 that is like okay. I mean, we know that Questing Beast isn't like blowing your own socks off, but if they're like loaded up on all this graveyard hate and they have a lot of like effects that kill your Scavengers, like the Stomp and red removal, Questing Beast lines up really well with like the deck that Zach was just talking about. There's no 4 damage spell in the whole list, right? So I'm playing Questing Beast, I'm smashing into you a bunch of times before you're getting to interact with it. Is the thought process there? I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but Samut is definitely a card people should consider. Hell, this Samut has First Strike, Vigilance, and Haste. You could have Samut Tribal.
The other one had the hilarious Flash and Haste, which was always a delight.
Vigilance too, right?
Yeah.
And Double Strike.
What is Vigilance? And then you tap a white and it gave target creature.
Oh, yeah.
Something.
That's right. It had a weird
strike?
Activated ability too.
Yeah, it was a red-green card, but it was secretly Naya.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And on top of that, my favorite thing about it was that their explanation was we put every keyword on there that you would associate with speed because Samut's supposed to be like the Flash in our Justice League.
Wow.
And then and then on top of that, I know David doesn't care about the story, and you shouldn't because it includes bullshit like this. The first scene that Samut's in gets caught by random palace guards while running away from them. Like, what are we doing here? Are you serious? What?
So the 5-mana Samut, by the way, grants all other creatures you control have haste. I didn't remember that.
There you go.
And then the white mana ability is it untaps another target creature. So instead of it having vigilance, it basically gives it to something else.
It bestows its vigilance upon others. Got it. Cool.
Well, kudos to that pilot. And be interesting to see if anything comes of these Urborg Scavengers or Samut aggro decks. So we're just about out of time, but Zach, David, anything else you want to shout out while we're still here?
If you like my stream, pay attention to your Twitter if you follow me on Twitter. And pay attention to your Twitch notifications. I don't have a solid schedule yet, but I'll be around for the next couple weeks, and I'm excited to play a bunch of Magic. If you're going to be at I don't know if it's an RC or it's the face-to-face tour weekend in Toronto, I will be there. If you want to say hi, please say hi, because I like meeting all the people who want to say hi to me. There hasn't yet been one who's a jerk. You could always break.
You can be the first.
You can be the first. I remember my first hurtful YouTube comment, and that's the day I knew I made it. And so you could be the one who lets me know that I've upgraded to a D tier Magic Celebrity from E tier.
Real fans stab in the chest, so just go up to Zach at his next event and just walk straight up
right.
to
You
him.
gotta
and
do it
just
to their face.
Kick him in the pants.
No, the first thing you do is say no offense, but and then, like insert fucked up thing.
Yep.
All right. Well, Zach, glad to have you back. Really great to see you. We'll be tuning into the stream. Hope to see you again soon. Get some rest. David, you and I will be closely tracking all the news coming up next week. We got a banning. We got some Lord of the Rings coming up. But you and I will instead be delving deep into activated abilities. We're going to be talking about Omenhawker and Training Grounds in our next episode. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you all next time.
All right. Take care, gentlemen.
Best of luck with the cephalids.
Deck list for this episode can be found at our homepage, faithlessbrewing.com. And tune in next time for new brews with Omenhawker and Training Grounds. Support for this podcast is provided by brewers like you. Join the Faithless family and help support the show at patreon.com/faithlessbrewing for Discord access, bonus content, and more. That's all for today. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.